Good morning, everyone. Why don't we go ahead and get started? My name is Doug Novetsky. I am with King County Stormwater. I'll be moderating this session. Just to make sure you're in the right place, this is the Municipal IDDE program update to integrate bacteria TMDL source screening. Just some reminders that this session is being recorded for the presentation, but it will not be being recorded during the Q&A. Just one more thing, please make sure that your cell phones are off or turned to vibrate. So I'd like to introduce Julie Brandt and Kristin Terpstra. Julie is with Parametrix and Kristin is with the City of Bothell. Julie's background, I'm going to read this because it's a little detailed. A senior surface water engineer specializing in regulatory compliance support, watershed planning, hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, NPDES permitting, low-impact development design, green stormwater infrastructure, NEPA, SEPA environmental assessments, and municipal, industrial, and construction stormwater management. She supports wetland restoration, fish passage analysis, hazardous material spill control management. Julie has a certificate in low-impact development from Washington State Department of Ecology, and is a certified erosion and sediment control lead, a CECL, and a licensed PE in Washington and Oregon. Prior to coming to Parametrix, she was a federal enforcement agent for the US EPA. Not bad. Kristin is a PE, is a senior surface water engineer with over 18 years of stormwater experience in both private and public sectors. At the City of Bothell, she works actively to improve stormwater management and reduce its impacts on residents through refined development standards, infrastructure improvements, technical assistance, and short and long-range planning. Kristin led the city's efforts in developing Bothell's Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination Program, IDDE, and is a key participant in the implementation of asset management software across the city. And so I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Doug, for the nice introduction. I'm going to go ahead and get started so we can get through these slides pretty quickly. But first, I just want to say we're here to talk about bacteria. As I was talking to Jean right before this, normally I'm an advocate for the kind of non-human parts of our environment that can't really speak up for themselves. But bacteria is actually one that this is a human health risk. And I didn't do this on purpose to have like a poignant story, but I actually just got over E. coli toxicity last week. I went on a school trip to Mexico with my daughter, and fortunately I made it through the whole trip, but I came home. I had E. coli and I came home, and it is brutal. It is brutal. So I got out. I was lucky I made it through. The antibiotics worked, and I made it through after a week. So that's why we want to talk about this. Yes, there's TMDLs, and I'm going to give most of the presentation, and Kristin's going to chime in with some good points from the city. Yes, there's TMDLs. Yes, there's your NPDES permit requirements, but really for any municipality, if you have animals or people in your municipality, this applies to you. So bacteria is really hard, but it's really hard to trace these little guys. They're sneaky. They're naturally present in our environment, and then they move and they grow and they die off and they bond to things, and it's hard to keep track of them. So we worked with the city, Parametrix worked with the City of Bothell, where they said, yeah, okay, we have a TMDL in North Creek. We want to take care of our bacteria anyway. Right now we have kind of okay, it looks weird, it smells weird, that'll flag it. We need something that's more advanced, more robust. We want to make sure that we're doing the right things. So we said, okay, we're going to help you talk to as many other municipalities as you can. So a lot of what I'm reporting today is we built on the work of others. So we owe great gratitude to City of Kirkland and Snohomish County and King County and others who really helped us with this study. We went through and analyzed, these are all source tracing field indicator tests that are specific to bacteria And we discussed them with the other jurisdictions and looked at City of Bothell's needs, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each of these. So first of all, there's the big one, visual and odor checks. This is basically field staff report on water that looks weird or smells weird. And the benefit, it's really straightforward, it's minimal cost, and you can really get quite a bit out of it. The challenge is that it's really general. You don't, great, it looks weird, smells weird, what's next? What we heard from the other municipalities is that really you get the most bang for your buck when you spread this across other departments. You can't have your surface water inspectors being the only ones that are doing this. So City of Bothell worked with their roads crews. I'm about to tell you one big punchline for this. City of Bothell worked with their roads crews, and they have regular catch basin inspection forms. And one of the biggest changes they made was to add a box to those inspection forms that says, did you check it to see if it looks weird or it smells weird? And if it, yeah.
Yeah, so we just implemented Lucity as our asset management system and work order system. And so our storm crews that do all of the maintenance on the catch basins have this on their form, and every catch basin inspection that they do, they check for looks weird, smells weird. If they check that box, then they go and create a work order for an illicit discharge investigation. So when it gets down to the end of the year for reporting numbers, it's how many catch basins were inspected and how many of them had looks weird, smells weird, and those are our numbers for the year. That's how we get our percent of the city, is how many catch basins do we have in the city, how many were inspected, and that gives us our percentage.
Yeah. So it's a very effective, straightforward technique for doing your bookkeeping, but also checking for the discharges. And then another key component was making sure once those crews knew, okay, I've flagged something, who do you call? So those are the two main training techniques that the city started doing across the board, straightforward and simple, because then they can call Kristin, and her crews know how to implement a number of the other techniques that we're going to talk about next. So the Sniffer Dogs, man, I so was excited about the Sniffer Dogs. And we specifically talked to King County and City of Kirkland did a study together. And in the end, for bacteria, it turns out the calibration didn't quite pan out for the Sniffer Dogs. It's still a technology that they are, City of Kirkland has definitely said, they're going to keep an eye on them. But as Jean and James talked about in the previous presentation, they might be better suited for other pollutants like PCBs. But one thing that Kirkland said, they're great for PR. So if you're trying to do public outreach and education, you bring out those Sniffer Dogs because people will show up and they're like, oh, this is great. The dyes and the optical brighteners, this is a really good technique to have in your toolbox, but it's not necessarily, we didn't find it to be a great standalone thing. It's, you can either start at the suspected source, or you can even often use it downstream to see if the components are present at all. And this really winds up being helpful in the context of other data. So this isn't like a standalone field test that you want to use. Flow and temperature, this can be super detailed with advanced equipment, or it can be general measurements with field equipment you probably already have. So with City of Bothell, they even do just visual flow checks when they can, like is the water moving at all? That matters, But then, pardon me, there's a whole issue of dry weather flows that have been discussed today, and with municipalities like City of Kirkland talked about it, City of Bothell has the same problem where you guys have really high base flows. And so going out and doing the dry weather just because it's flowing during dry weather doesn't mean it's illicit. So all of that, these techniques matter in the context of what's going on in your jurisdiction. So this is not, the flows was not something that the city invested in advanced equipment. So here's Jeannie. in her lab. And Jeannie gave me a tour of the whole lab, and we really appreciated the information from King County. So for King County, this is basically in-house labs to grow and test bacteria cultures. The real benefit is that it's customized, it's controlled, it's immediately available. You can really dictate what you want to know. And the challenges are, there's a lot of training and there's cost, and you got to set it up, and you got to have some dedicated staff that work on this. And so for King County, they really like it. It works well. They have the staff that can take care of it, and they have a lot of ground to cover, so they make a lot of use of it. And it may not be right for every jurisdiction because there is the staff time and the cost involved. But there's some components of how King County uses their lab that can be meaningful even if you don't have an in-house lab. One of this is kind of their the flow of how they make their decisions. And the real key with this is that even with their in-house source tracing and elimination, they still need really good mapping of their system, which we highly recommend for everyone. We all need it. You got to know what you have. And a really good ownership database of what potential pollution sources might be out there. You need a business inventory. And you need this for bacteria, you need this for all different types of source tracing. So there's some really straightforward things that you need anyway that are really important for bacteria. Next up, we have like your local outsourced labs. That just collecting your samples and shipping them off to the regular regional lab. They're convenient. And the other benefit is that sometimes even if you know exactly what you have going on, sometimes you need that documentation for your reporting purposes, for permit compliance. You use the lab, on demand. With bacteria, one of the challenges with the local labs is that they don't do DNA testing. So if you need something very specific, you're not going to get it at the local lab. Most of the municipalities we talk to, they're able to use their in-house toolbox and the local labs, and that meets their needs. And then there's some municipalities, Snohomish County and King County have both used the DNA labs because it does give you more specific information. So basically, there is an EPA lab that's closer that can give you DNA testing. It's not really open. You have to be working on a special project with EPA is my understanding. But there's another lab called Source Molecular that's down in Florida that a lot of our local jurisdictions use. So you got to ship it off to Florida. It's one of the challenges. There's some wait time, there's some cost, but they can give you specific information. Right now, when I last checked, they can differentiate between cow, pig, bird, gull, goose, chicken, dog, deer, elk, and horse. And there might be more that are added to that. There is expense and there's the time involved waiting for the results to come back. And Snohomish County even had some experiences where there was a little bit of cross-contamination. So it's good information, but it's not always perfect. And so this can be an option if you need much more precise information. So then, even with these tools for field indicator tests for bacteria, a lot of the feedback that we got from the other jurisdictions is that how you move through the system is as important as the chemical tests that you do when you're there. So as I mentioned before, you need that really good mapping and inventory, and complaint databases make a big difference too. So, and one tip that we got from King County was the paper records are just not going to do it for you. That they had to switch over to an electronic database and start cross-referencing their different departments, and it was a whole new world. So the more you can get electronic, and and Kristin's nodding because that's the big changes that you guys wound up making internally. Once you can cross-reference that and get everybody communicating, it makes a difference. Next, there was this a hierarchy of kind of a decision-making tree that Snohomish County recommended. And you don't have to read all these bubbles, but it's just, the idea that, okay, we're source tracing, we got to hurry up and find it. And timing matters with bacteria because it can change and then we can kind of lose the flag. Don't freak out. So with bacteria, it actually is okay to slow down. If you're having a discharge, you'll have another one. So with this hierarchy from Snohomish County kind of says, okay, that's great, something got flagged. How many samples did you actually have? So you make a decision there. And it's like, oh, well, maybe we're panicking. Maybe we didn't have enough. So you go do a little bit more sampling. And then, okay, we've got enough samples. All right, how many of those were actually a hit? And how many of those, might it have been, background material and background presence? And then, okay, no, we had a lot of hits. Okay, fine. How big were they? Like, is this a big source or is this a little source? And so when you're a municipality trying to figure out how you're going to spend your staff time and money, take a beat and figure out where your really big problems are. That's okay, and that's actually really meaningful in this process. Yeah.
So we kind of have a two-tier with our IDDE. We've got our spill response, and so yeah, we have that same thing. It's like, oh, we've got something, we got to go handle it right now. And so that's kind of where in this bacteria program of looks weird, smells weird, this is kind of our second level where we have our IDDE, our immediate response, the report gets closed in 21 days, but then we have 1 to 3 focus areas in the city that at any given time we are monitoring over time and watching the trends and seeing if we can find where it's coming from, because it was not obvious from a standard quick analysis of going out there and walking upstream.
So then that ties in, in the end, this was Bothell's final program. And that this kind of summarizes a little bit of what Kristin was just talking about. The main, after all of this, and they said, oh, we need something more advanced than looks weird, smells weird. And then finally they said, oh, no, we don't. We just need to use looks weird, smells weird in a more deliberate way. And then report it to the surface water folks, and that's when Kristin takes over. They use all of the they do use most of the tools that we've discussed in the toolbox, building on what James and Jeannie were saying in the previous presentation. You're not necessarily hitting every step. You can use your judgment about, what's going on at that particular junction. And then rank and prioritize where you're going to take action next. But in the meantime, use all of the different staff as your eyes and your noses out in the field. So Kristin would like to give a little bit of a progress report, like how's it going? And you had the issue with the one septic system.
Yeah, so in the 2 years that we've been using our Lucity and our Looks Weird, Smells Weird box, we've had about 10 boxes that were checked, yes, that resulted in investigations. We had one particular area where we were getting high fecal coliform in a wetland area. We actually had a citizen ecology group alert us that he samples his neighborhood and was getting those high numbers. So we used that as our first area to go and investigate, trace upstream, see how it was going. For us, the biggest challenge was it was septic driven and we couldn't prove it. So there's the area, a lot of our Alderwood water and sewer district is septic in Bothell, and we're still trying to figure out how, since we're not the sewer provider, how to make all those pieces work together to change that. But we have what we have, and so we had a whole group of houses that were septic. We couldn't figure out which one. We had a suspicion on which one it was, but health districts, without seeing a direct connection, they said that there was no way to use lab data to enforce. So unless you see a pipe or you see a discharge, they will not do anything about it. So luckily, one of the properties sold, the numbers went back down. So we're hoping that means that's the end of it, but the citizen group is still sampling anyway, so we'll see what happens going forward. Now we're working on a second location where we have a pond that's receiving higher fecals coming in, so we're starting to monitor that one for where's the baseline and kind of see what we can get from that.
So, and that basically covers it. I've already, drilled home this point of these high-level, looks weird, smells weird tests. They matter, and use all of your crews. Use your fire department, your animal inspectors, the guy that reads the electric meters. You can be as creative as you want. Just make sure they know who to call. And then you've got all these other techniques that you've got a few staff that can do the special source tracing. So those other details are meaningful, those detailed checks. And that's it. So thank you very much. We have time for questions.